Okay, well, I'm going to start recording. Okay, everybody, I'm speaking today with Maaha Elahi, and I can honestly say, Maaha, that I've been looking forward to having this conversation with you for quite a while, and not least because of your very busy schedule. We've had to postpone once or twice, so I'm delighted that you can make it this evening because there are so many interesting learning points from your experience of going to the bar, and in many ways, you're an exemplar of what a career path to the bar can look like. And I really want the audience to understand that. And you've just had so many interesting experiences as well. So it's great that we're doing this today. And we're going to focus on the pupillage interview itself, because that's very topical. And it's something that we get asked about a lot. But just as a starting point, before we get into the detail of that, can you just give the audience an update of your career path and where you currently are to date?
Yeah, definitely. And I'd just like to say I've been really looking forward to having a conversation with you too, David. And it's really exciting to be able to give back to the career service. So just a bit about me. I did my undergrad law degree at Cambridge at St John's. And when I graduated, I did the BPTC immediately after. Whilst I was doing my BPTC, I was doing a lot of pro bono. So I was doing things like the free representation unit, representing people in the Social Security Tribunal, and Vocalize, which was teaching debating classes in prison. I also had some part-time work at a law firm, just clerking and teaching law students as a law tutor. So I did quite a few things. And then once I finished that, I worked as a caseworker at the Howard League, which is a charity representing children and young people in prison. I then switched a little bit and actually worked for a Labour MP just to get a bit of taste of politics. And then after that, I did the MPhil in Criminology at Cambridge, at St John's as well, which was a great experience. I'm now working as a paralegal on the infected blood inquiry, and I'm due to commence my pupillage at Garden Court in October. And I applied for pupillage a few times throughout the year. So I learned a lot throughout my journey and really developed my CV, which I'm excited to talk to you guys about.
Yeah, and just to be very clear about that, you've actually taken 3 rounds of pupillage applications. I think students might not realize that just how rare, if not unique, it would be to get pupillage at the first attempt. And most people take at least twice. And what's interesting about you is you persevered for that 3rd one.
Yeah, so I've heard a lot of people getting in after a few years. I think it can be quite rare to get in on the first go unless you've sort of bide your time a bit and gotten enough experience before applying. But as law graduates, I think we run straight into it quite quickly because we assume that we'd get there quite quickly. But one thing that I discovered whilst applying for the bar is that it actually makes sense why it takes so long to get pupillage, because pupillage is quite different from a training contract, which is 2 years in different seats, whereas pupillage is 6 months of you working with a supervisor. And then after that 6 months, in most chambers, you're on your feet representing people in court. So they're looking for someone who, after 6 months of them molding you a bit, you can hit the ground running. So after a while, it really made sense why I needed a lot of paralegal work and a lot of academic experience, probably even a master's, because it just is so different from other careers and it's so different from the solicitor route. But yes, as you said, I applied 3 times and each year got more and more interviews. I think in my first year, I just had 1 first round and no second round. Second year, I had 5 first rounds, no second rounds. And then the 3rd year, I had 10 first rounds, 2 second rounds, and 1 pupillage offer. So I definitely learned a lot about interviews over the process. And I feel like I could definitely share a lot of tips about those.
Absolutely perfect. And did you say where you're actually going on to practice? I don't know if you mentioned chambers.
Yeah, so I'll be working at Garden Court Chambers. So they're quite a human rights based set. They do a lot of areas touching on social justice issues, quite a broad range of different areas. I'm quite interested in public law and criminal law, but they also do other areas like housing, education, family. I was really motivated to get pupillage in more and non-corporate, more human rights based chambers, and Garden Court was always my dream chambers, so I'm really excited to start there.
Well, I'm delighted that you achieved the dream. Let's focus on those pupillage interviews then, the ones that you just alluded to. And this can be quite a long answer on your part, so don't worry if that's the case. So just generally, what learning points would you pass on to the audience based on all that experience of eventually making it successfully through the pupillage interview rounds?
Yeah, so I think I'm going to discuss about three things. I'm going to discuss sort of the more emotional and like mental preparation that you need to do, and then the more practical tips, and then just the general frameworks of different interviews.
Right.
So just to start off with the sort of emotional preparation you can do. I think what I tell people is that you will definitely get rejections, because that's the nature of pupillage and pupillage applications, because the competition is so high. I think, don't quote me on this, but when I last checked the statistics, I think about around 3,000 people applied for pupillage, but under 300 actually got pupillage in the last application round, because chambers shut down and they lose funding, so they can't fund as many pupillages and things. So it's a really competitive process, and it means that you will get rejected, and that most of the time isn't a reflection on your ability to become a barrister. So rejection is generally a part of the pupillage process. And that's something I had to accept, which definitely wasn't easy, but I had to accept that. And I think I always knew that it would take me some time. But I think I always knew that this is what I wanted, so I was willing to go for it. And I wouldn't be happy if I didn't have a career as a lawyer in a specific area of law, and I wanted the bar more than I wanted to be a solicitor. So I think it was about just being motivated. But one thing I learned year in, year out was that you can pick yourself up after all the rejections and after you've not got it 1 year, because you have months and months to just clear your mind and really get back in the game. So I would take some time, cry, be really upset about how I didn't get it. And then I would actually send my CV to different people I'd networked with at the bar, and I would say, what is missing? And I made this checklist of different things that I believed I needed to become a barrister based on what I'd been told. And that was such valuable guidance I was given. And I ended up doing everything on the checklist. So it got to the point where I would show my CV to people and they'd say, there's nothing else. Like, it's just about writing a good application and performing well in interviews. So I think it's really about accepting the reality of the situation, but not in a way that brings you down about it. Stay motivated and think practically about what you can do. So that kind of moves on to my second point about what you can do. And in relation to interviews, there's so much you can do. It's really important to develop a network at the bar, because the bar is a very traditional career, which is built on like who you know, really. So it's important to network, to get some mentors. So I would network a lot, and I had a few barristers who gave me mock interviews, which was really, really helpful. I also did mock interviews with like my sister, just someone who's not in the bar, who's completely different, but can at the very least pick up on the things I do that are just not generally good in an interview, like using fillers and things like that. I also recorded myself a lot, which was really, really helpful. And I got to see how I was appearing. And it's not just about it's not just about what you say, but it's about how you present yourself, because they want to see what you would be like after a bit of work in court. So they would want to know that you speak very well and that you have some sort of like command, and they want to see what you're capable of after a bit of training during pupillage. I also would one thing that really helped me actually in preparing for the questions was keeping up to date with the law, and I think that's so important. So what I would do is I would check the legal news every day, and through different forms of like actual news like BBC and The Guardian, different resources, like the Inner Temple do a newsletter, or the Times do a newsletter called The Brief, or I would look at legal blogs online, and I would read through all of those things and sort of think about what is likely to come up in an interview. And then I created this document on my laptop and had little tables like throughout the document with 2 columns for and against, and I would have like a headline of the issue. So for example, Shamima Begum Supreme Court decision, and then 3 arguments for, 3 arguments against.
Brilliant.
And yeah, and so it was really good, because a lot of those things I was right. I predicted what could come up, because a lot of those things were hot in the news. And if not, it gave me the ability to analyze some legal information and think of arguments for and against. And it's so important to not just think about your own opinion, but the other sides. So I would do that, but I would also discuss these topics with friends and family, because law and the bar just became my life. So I would talk about these things with my family or my friends and really think about things from different angles and have a bit of an argument about these things, just so that I could get my creativity going. Another thing I would do was I would make these flashcards of any sort of question that could come up. So those are the general questions of, why do you want to be a barrister? Why do you want to practice this area of law? Different things, a recent case that interests you, or these topical questions about the legal news. And I would just walk around looking at these flashcards, and I would test myself. I would think, why do I want to be a barrister? Okay, I know I have 3 points. I try and remember what they were, and then I'd look at the flashcard and check that I got that right. But I basically would have planned my answers and then just kept testing myself like it was an exam. And that was on the back of some advice I got from someone as well. So all these tips I have are honestly off the back of other people's tips. So I know that they work because they worked for other people and they did work for me. So that was what helped me practically prepare for pupillage. And the last thing that helped me prepare for pupillage interviews was really getting the hang of different interviews, because every single one is so different. So a lot of them, especially if you're applying for criminal law or a set that does a bit of crime, or advocacy exercises. So those tend to be a plea in mitigation or a bail application. So if you haven't done the bar course as of yet, it's really important to look those 2 types of applications up. And I would make sort of a cheat sheet where I had this like a few pages on what you should always include in those things, or possible arguments that are typical. So for example, in a plea in mitigation, I'd have a list of the aggravating and mitigating factors that are in the sentencing guidelines. And then I would read, during the interview, I would read the advocacy exercise that they had provided and the case, and then I would tick things off and then basically form my argument from that. So it's really important to prepare for advocacy in that way, as well as through practicing. But it's important to bear in mind that the advocacy exercises can be really difficult. I mean, in one interview, I only had 10 minutes to prepare for the exercise before I had to perform. So it really is a challenge. But as I said before, it makes sense why it's so hard, because as barristers, you will be instructed at the last minute and you will have to perform under pressure. So another type of pupillage interview are just general legal exercises. So you might be asked to answer a problem question before an interview and submit it, and then discuss it in the interview, or read a case beforehand and then discuss it in the interview. So that again is a different skill, but one that I'm sure law students are very much used to. So I would approach it in the same way that you would with any sort of legal problem you would do during your undergraduate degree. Another is what I touched on before, is just any sort of discussion topics. And those you generally can't prepare for too much, because it can be quite hard to predict what they could bring up. So some of the questions I had were very topical things, but some of them were just things out of the blue, but general legal questions that have been thought about for decades. So it's really hard to predict, but I think the best way to prepare is just by putting yourself on the spot, by practicing with friends or doing mock interviews and things like that, where you get someone to throw random things at you, or you yourself do that by thinking of an issue that you read about online and thinking, what do I think about this? What are my arguments for and against? Rarely I had an interview where they really asked me much about me and about what I had said in my application, because they only have two chances to meet you. And usually the interviews are really short, so they don't really tend to spend much time asking about you and your experiences in a way, because it's already mentioned in your application. But that's not to say that they won't. They might try and ease you into it and just say, why do you want to be a barrister? Or what work experience has really cemented your decision to come to the bar? So it's always good to practice those things. But what helped me actually was practicing those things anyway, to make me remember why I wanted to be at the bar, why I wanted to practice this area, and why I wanted to go to this chambers. So I rarely got asked, why do you want to come to this chambers? But just doing that research and thinking of an answer in case it came up was good for me, because you apply to so many chambers, it's so easy to lose motivation. But if you remember why each one matters to you and why you'd be happy at any of them, is really important. And the last thing I'd like to mention is competency questions. So I got a lot of these where I was asked about asked to demonstrate or talk about a time where I had, for example, my ethics had come into conflict with my legal work or something like that, or time I worked in a team. You know, it could be those general skills that are required in any career and those ones that are required at the bar. So what I would do is I created a mind map on my laptop where I thought about the different skills of a barrister. I literally Googled skills of a barrister so I didn't miss anything out. And the main skills of a barrister are things like advocacy, obviously, but also research skills, communication skills, things like that. And then I thought of scenarios where I had demonstrated those skills through work experience and pro bono, or even just through education or just life experience, actually. So anything throughout my life. And that really helped for questions like that. So for example, if I was asked a question about dealing with a vulnerable client, I remembered, barristers are meant to have good oral communication skills. That includes client communication skills, that includes empathy. And I would have my mind map in my mind and remember those different scenarios I had thought of. So I think that is some valuable advice, and it's a key thing to remember what a barrister actually does. Barristers aren't just advocates. Of course, that is their main role, but I think when you're a bit at your earlier stages of your legal education, you just see them as advocates, but they are so much more. It's important to remember the other skills they have and think about whether you yourself are suited to them. So throughout the years of working, I realized how much barristers do research and how they have to be experts of the law at times. And that's something I didn't know when I was a student. So it's doing things like this can help you really learn about the bar and also remind yourself that why you want it. So I guess a nice way to round off is interviews also helped me remember why I wanted this, which in turn made me work harder. So even if you're not getting there, your passion for the career is probably getting stronger as you go on.
That's a great exposition, Maaha. Lots of useful advice. I'm going to sort of probe on a couple of points in a minute, but I think what strikes, and I hope what's evident to the audience, is that this essentially and fundamentally positive attitude that you've got to this whole experience, even dealing with rejection and getting the feedback, all of it seems to be based around, well, there's something you can learn, there's something you can improve, there's something you can do better next time. And that does strike me as a tremendous element of your resilience, which has come naturally to you, but which anybody making these applications will need to tap into one way and another.
Definitely. Yeah, I think what helped was networking, I think, because I would ask different barristers about their experiences, and all of them knew how hard the pupillage application process was. And knowing that it wasn't just me is what helped me keep going, and just accepting at the outset that this will be hard, but knowing it was what I wanted is what helped. I think just speaking to people is really important.
Mm. Where did you get those networks from? Were they through the inn? Were they through college? Were they through, well, how did you really build those networks?
So my in was actually really helpful in building the networks because I would go to qualifying sessions, which are events that you have to go to as a bar student. And a lot of the time barristers are there too. So it was a great way to meet barristers. But I just was really creative about how I could network. So for example, there was one barrister who did the MPhil in Criminology a few years before I did it. And he actually worked at Garden Court. So I wanted to be at Garden Court. So I reached out to him and just asked him a few questions about if he thought the MPhil could help me in my application. You know, is it good to have a master's? Does that master's need to be in law? Things like that. And we developed a professional relationship, and it was really great. And then he ended up being a key mentor of mine. There are a lot of programs as well. So the Inn of Courts obviously run a mentoring scheme, which can be really helpful, but also different organizations can run mentoring schemes. So I signed up to be a mentee of Bridging the Bar, which is an organization for individuals who are underrepresented at the bar, to get some mentors to help them with their applications. So that was really helpful. So it's really important to actually stay in touch with the legal world. And that's not just legal developments, but just to know what's going on and what barristers are talking about, because these sorts of things are set up by barristers. So if you have like a Twitter, you have to have like a legal Twitter where you follow loads of barristers, follow the Inns of Courts and loads of organizations, so you can find out about these different schemes. I mean, sometimes barristers will just tweet that they're willing to look at applications or deliver mock interviews. And that was the way I got one mock interview in one of the years I applied. So there are options out there, but it's really important to actually sort of like look out for them, not just through like the news and things, but just like Twitter is so good for this. Sign up to different mailing lists and things, you know, become a member of an inn as early as you can. Speak to your college and see if there are any barristers who are alumni who could possibly help. I mean, a lot of the fellows at Cambridge are also barristers too. So if any of them could be of help, that's something else. So there are lots of options. I think you just need to be comfortable networking, which is something I wasn't definitely not when I was an undergrad at Cambridge. I developed that by force of habit during my bar course. So you have to become like that, because barristers are very social creatures in a way, and you have to be able to talk to people that you just met quite easily. So it's good for you as well to develop that skill.
Did you join the inn when you went on the BTC course, or did you do it earlier than that?
So I actually joined during when I was applying for the BPTC, but I wished I had done it sooner, because I think that would have been good for me. But I think the inns do some events at Cambridge, and I did go to those. So they do invite Cambridge students to events or come and deliver seminars at Cambridge, as you know.
No, I publicize those as well, and I think it's worth saying, you know, your audience listening to this will be both law and non-law students.
Yeah, that's true. I think that is really helpful for non-law students as well, just to sort of enter the legal world a bit more, where they can speak to people, because I mean, a lot of barristers didn't do law as their undergrad, so it definitely doesn't make a difference in the end. But just to get a taste of what the bar is like for law students and non-law students, it's good to join your inn. And also just any sort of like legal seminars. I mean, it was easier for me to do this when I was in London doing my BPTC, but even in Cambridge, you know, I'm sure there's a lot of different legal seminars where lawyers would come and discuss different areas. So one organization I really liked was Young Legal Aid Lawyers, and they ran seminars. A lot of stuff is online, of course, now. So that's a good way to just sort of to network, actually, because a lot of the time afterwards, you could go up to a lawyer and just ask them a few questions about their career, add them on LinkedIn, you know, develop a conversation, and then maybe ask them a bit later if they could help you with looking at an application or delivering a mock interview.
No, I'm pleased you've sort of articulated what the reality of networking is as a word. it sounds very off-putting, or it sounds slightly smacking of the sort of old boy network, using connections which not everybody is entitled, not enabled to activate. But the reality, it isn't like that, and you've made it very clear. Networking is just a series of very simple, practical, pragmatic steps to reach out to an audience that are quite willing to be approached and to respond, really.
Yeah, definitely. I would agree. A
Okay.
lot of barristers have been really open to
Yeah.
helping me and
Yeah.
are open to helping for pupillage applicants.
Just before we wrap up, a couple of very specific questions back with the mechanics of the pupillage interview, if I may. One is dealing with tricky moments, and there are always the tricky moments of either you've realized that what you've just said isn't what you meant to say, and you are now, for whatever reason, having to change your mind to the audience. And the second one is not having the faintest idea what to say next when you're asked by something.
Yeah.
So with either of those or both of them, can you just give us some insights on how you learned to respond to the tricky moments?
Yeah. So one thing I would do is I would have a pad of paper next to me. So most of my interviews were online, but even when I had some in person in the years before COVID, I would take a notebook and I would have paper next to me. And when I was asked a question, I would always like write things down, actually, unless particularly if it was a tricky question. But it's really important, especially for me to just take a pause, because I would tend to jump into speaking and I'd get really excited, and it wouldn't come across in the way I wanted it to, which was like calm and collected and how I would like to speak in court. So I would have a piece of paper by my side and draft an argument, literally quickly write down 1 or 2 words just to formulate something in my mind, and or just maybe like a list of for and against, and just to sort of organize my thoughts a bit, because it's really important to have a structure when you're speaking. It doesn't have to be, in like I have 3 points, first point is, second point is, third point. It doesn't have to be like that. It can sound more conversational, but you do have to have some sort of structure and signposting. So for me, that really helped me. So it meant that if I was asked a question that I had no idea the answer to, I would take time and I would breathe and I would draft something. They are absolutely fine with that. Actually, I think they commend that, because that's also what they would do in court when they're thrown by a question. And it's something that I was told by my mentors to do. And I think I was nervous that it wouldn't be obvious on the camera, but actually it seemed to be fine. So I would do that. Another thing I would do is, like I said, take a breath and usually take a sip of water. So I'd always have water next to me, and that would just buy me a second, just to like give me some time to think. So that was really helpful with the tricky questions. And if I had said something and I thought, oh my God, I should not have said that, or I did not mean that in the way it came across, or something, or I've completely changed my mind, that's not the argument I want to put forward, then sometimes I would actually say, sorry, can I repeat my answer? Can I start again? I think I did that a few times. And I had done that because, again, a barrister that helped me a lot had told me that he had done that at the chambers that he ended up getting pupillage at. So I would do that. And that, I think, shows reflection, like immediate reflection after you've just said something. And that's quite a good quality for a barrister to have, to be able to clarify after they have not spoken in the way they wanted to. So I would do things like that, and that was really helpful for me.
That's excellent. And you've actually touched on an answer to my second question, which is, you mentioned there you wanted to come across as appearing calm and collected, and you actually said you wanted to present it as you would speak in court. So and I do find this a real differentiator between those that feel they're both confident and successful in pupillage interviews and those that aren't, and that's the tone of voice. Can you, but it's very difficult. I know you get trained on this at your BPTC or your BTC course, but can you give an insight into what individuals can do for themselves in developing a tone of voice?
Yeah, that's a really good question. And I think the most important thing that I'd like to pass on is that there is no type of barrister, there's no type of way of speaking, there's no accent that you need, there's no specific way of speaking. One thing that actually helped me realize this was there's a podcast called the Advocacy Podcast, and Leslie Thomas QC, who is a member of Garden Court, spoke on this podcast and said that he, as a Black man who grew up in South London, I think, had a specific accent, a specific way of speaking. He himself, because of his personality and individuality, he would speak with a lot of passion. And he, over the years, learned exactly how to speak in a way that felt comfortable for him. So he worried that he wouldn't live up to this standard of what a barrister should be and what they should look like. But he's become, I mean, one of the best advocates in the country just by staying true to himself. And as cheesy as it sounds, I think that's really important. So when I was applying for pupillage, I would say to my mentors, should I speak differently? I mean, one thing that got me during my BPTC course was that during advocacy classes, I would smile a lot. And when we would do applications to judges, like as mocks, or when we do bail applications and things, I would be smiling. And my classmates would say, you know, you were smiling. Are you not taking this seriously? Are you finding it funny? And I thought, no, this is just how I am. And probably even more so when I'm nervous. So I would speak to my mentors and say, should I change my demeanor? And should I change my tone? Should I sound more serious instead of jolly, like how I usually sound? And they said no, because it's good to come across as authentic, because they can probably see if you're faking because you seem a bit uncomfortable, but also they're not just looking for a barrister, they're looking for a member of their chambers. So they want to see that you've got your personality too and you're ready to show it. So I think the key thing to remember is you don't need to fit yourself in a mold that would be unnatural, but you do need to treat it with the formality and respect that it deserves. And it's not just a simple interview. These aren't like normal interviews. I mean, I've done a lot of paralegal interviews and things. These are very different because they want to see how you would speak under pressure, because that's what barristers do regularly. You would need to speak formally, you would need to use formal language, you need to speak slowly. There's so much to do, and you could just practice that, not just through mock interviews and mooting, but also just through public speaking. So in my undergrad, I hosted a charity ball at some point, and it's just because I enjoyed public speaking. And I'm doing things like this now to prepare for pupillage, so that I keep putting myself out there and speaking. So I learned how to speak slowly and stop using fillers and things like that. So practice in any way you can, but it is this balance of really staying true to yourself and showing your personality, but also treating it with the respect and formality that the whole process deserves.
Well, that's been everything I hoped for in terms of the nitty-gritty, detailed, effective advice. And I hope anybody listening is going to take multiple learning points away from what you've been saying and apply themselves to it. And don't forget, this was the experience of 3 years, 3 rounds of making pupillage applications. Why don't we just finish where I suggested when we started, which was just to step out of the pupillage interview and highlight the importance of all of that work experience that you did get, because I think, again, it can come as a bit of a surprise to students who are at the undergraduate stage looking forward to think of just how necessary and valuable all of that type of work experience is. So just end by your thoughts on reiterating that, perhaps.
Yes. So as I said, it's important to remember that pupillage is a very unique stage of anyone's career. And like I said, you're thrown into the deep end quite quickly in a way that you wouldn't be in some other careers. And it's important to have your experience. So I think a lot of the time it can be hard to digest the fact that after your degree, especially at an amazing university like Cambridge, you won't get in there quite quickly, and you might see your peers getting into their fields quite quickly. But it's what I did was I also got excited by the prospect of being able to explore different areas of law without actually being like doing my pupillage and working in those areas. You know, I had the time to do some pro bono and work at different firms and charities and things to really discover who I want to be as a lawyer. And it's exciting, and it's a key part of the process. So it can be, as I said, it can be hard to digest, but it's important for you, for your future self who will be doing pupillage, and it's important for you now to figure out what exactly would be helpful. So my key piece of advice is just enjoy it, because most people get pupillage a bit later in life anyway. So this is normal. I think it was hard for me because I didn't know too many people applying for pupillage. Most of my friends went down the solicitor route and did training contracts. But it's something that it's really important, because you can really figure out where your strengths and weaknesses are, what you like and what you don't like. And if the bar is for you, then you need to be someone who's quite resilient and deal with taking rejection, because barristers themselves lose cases, and that can be really upsetting when they've stood up in court and passionately represented their client. So it's all part of the process, and at the end of the day it will make you a better barrister in the long run. But I think it's just about going back to what I said initially. It's about thinking about the practical things you can do to change each year, but also managing your emotions and thinking, how can I process these rejections and then prepare myself and motivate myself to go for the bar again next year. So I think there's an element of delusion as well, of believing when no one else might believe, or no one is telling you you will get there, because they don't know. And you say to yourself, I know I'm going to get there. So it's an element of delusion and confidence that will keep you going as well.
Well, look, Maaha, I just want to say thanks on behalf of the audience. I hope you've inspired them. I know from experience that 80% of what you've said, they won't hear from anybody else. And it was very direct, it was very helpful, and I hope it's going to be very educational. So on behalf of everybody, thanks very much for just finding the time to give us all of that information.
No, thank you for having this chat with me. It's been really fun.